On his hospital bed, my husband gripped my hand to dictate his final will, leaving half his estate to his lifelong mistress, and offering me nothing but a spot in his grave. The sheer weight of his betrayal triggered a sudden collapse. But when my eyes fluttered open again, I found myself standing in the very day my nightmare began. My husband of 30 years, Arthur, grasped my trembling hand on his hospital bed as he prepared to make his final will. The sterile scent of the hospital room was suffocating, but not nearly as suffocating as the words that casually slipped from his pale lips. "Half of my estate goes to our son, and the other half to Evelyn," he wheezed, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. I froze, the blood pounding in my ears. "Evan, but my name is Diane," I thought, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of his declaration. Before I could even voice my shock, Tyler, our grown son who I had sacrificed everything to raise, simply nodded his head in solemn agreement. "Aunt Evelyn waited half her life for you, Dad," Tyler murmured softly. "It is what she deserves." Arthur shifted his gaze toward me, offering me his final, magnanimous words. "I won't mistreat you, Diane," he whispered. "When you pass away 100 years from now, you can be buried with me." In that shattering instant, the truth finally laid itself bare. He had harbored a white moonlight, a lifelong, secret love with whom he had been having an illicit affair for years. The sheer force of my anger triggered a massive, severe fainting spell, and I lost consciousness right there at his hospital bedside. My heart broken, and my life entirely wasted. Then, I opened my eyes. I was no longer in that high-tech hospital room. Instead, I found myself returning to the very day Arthur told me our son was too young, demanding that I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. I looked around in a daze, taking in the peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights of the shabby, outdated clinic in front of me. The pungent smell of cheap floor wax and iodine brought my scattered senses back to the grim reality of the 1990s. From down the street, Arthur came rushing toward the clinic, pedaling furiously on his vintage 10-speed bicycle. He slammed the brakes, barely stopping before he started barking at me. "What on earth is going on?" he demanded, his face flushed with irritation. "Tyler is such an honest child. Why did his teacher page me on my beeper, saying he accidentally injured a classmate's eye and hurt him?" He frowned tightly, his eyes narrowing as he expressed his deep dissatisfaction with me. "I discussed this with you already," he scolded, pointing a finger in my direction. "There is a lot going on at home. The child is small, and as a mother you should quit your job to take care of the family," he huffed, adjusting his collar. "If you had just agreed earlier, this tragedy wouldn't have happened." I moved through the motions in a complete daze, handling the hysterical parents of the injured child and paying a massive sum of money as compensation. After the ordeal was finally settled, Arthur turned to me and spoke again, reiterating his demands. It was only then, staring into his self-righteous eyes, that I finally understood. I seemed to have come back to life. I was reborn on the exact day he wanted me to become a housewife, to stabilize the rear, so he could ensure his own prosperous career. You couldn't really blame me for my slow reaction to the situation, because in my previous life, I was already an old lady when my previous life ended. My brain was still shaking off the cobwebs of decades of subservience. I remembered everything so clearly. In my last life, in order to care for our young son and serve my aging parents-in-law, I had no choice but to resign right when my development in the theater company was at its absolute peak. The retiring theater director, Mr. Davis, was an old acquaintance of my dad, and I had studied acting and classical singing with him since childhood. When I handed in my resignation, he tried to keep me several times. He passionately argued that women hold up half the sky, insisting that with my singing voice and natural ability, I had every chance to take over his position as director. But Arthur, as a rare college graduate majoring in theater in this era, had coveted this prestigious position for a very long time. We both knew the unspoken truth: if I withdrew from the running, the director position would definitely be his. Mr. Davis had sighed, looking at me with deep sympathy. "I cannot interfere with your family affairs, but I hope you keep your destiny in your own hands," he warned me. "If one day he acts like a heartless man in a play, you will at least have a way out. At that time, troubled by the endless complex household chores, and coaxed by Arthur's sweet words, I firmly believed our marriage was built on genuine love, completely different from those old-fashioned arranged ones. So, I stepped down. After I resigned, Arthur successfully took over the theater director's position. From then on, he became significantly busier, throwing himself into writing plays, rehearsing, socializing, and touring all over the country. He would be gone for a dozen days at the shortest, or several months at the longest. I was left behind, forced to face all the grueling household chores entirely alone. My parents-in-law were old and incredibly demanding. My mother-in-law claimed she got chest tightness whenever she was angry, weaponizing her health against me. I took careful, exhausted care of them, waiting on them hand and foot, until they both passed away peacefully at the age of 83. Raising our son was an entirely different battle. Tyler was different from other children from a young age. He couldn't even speak at 3 years old, a condition which was later known as autism. The incident at the clinic happened because he liked a classmate's tiger eraser, grabbed it directly from them, and when they resisted, he injured the classmate's eye with a pen. Determined to save my son, I consulted piles of foreign medical materials, accompanied him in rigorous behavioral exercises every single day, and patiently taught him by repeating a single sentence thousands of times until he gradually returned to normal. While I was drowning in domestic duties and therapy sessions, Arthur's career went incredibly smoothly. Soaring high into the stratosphere, he looked radiant and handsome every day, making me look like a dusty, worn-out woman by comparison. Walking on the street together, some people even mistakenly thought I was his mother. When his retirement finally came, I genuinely thought he would fulfill the grand promise he made when asking me to resign all those years ago. He had sworn he would let me live a good life and take me traveling everywhere when he finally had free time. Unexpectedly, just after getting his retirement notice, he got deeply indignant about stepping down and suffered a massive heart attack. Rushed to the hospital, the doctor quickly issued a critical condition notice. He struggled to sit up in his hospital bed, frantically called the medical staff in to be witnesses, and declared he wanted to make a will. His property was strictly divided into 2 portions, one for his son, and one for Evelyn, but my name was Diane. While I stood there entirely stunned, the son I had painstakingly raised to be normal simply nodded. Tyler callously stated that Aunt Evelyn had waited a lifetime for Arthur and deserved it. Arthur then raised his frail hand to me, promising he wouldn't mistreat me and that I could be buried with him. It was in that suffocating room I finally knew he and Evelyn, the famous lead actress in our theater company, had been having a passionate affair for years. Dizzy with betrayal, dizziness rushed to my brain, and I collapsed right at his bedside. Opening my eyes again to the smell of the clinic, I realized I was back to the day my son was expelled for causing trouble, and Arthur asked me to resign. I snapped out of my memories, lowered my eyes, and sneered at the man standing before me. He is not just my son. Why should I resign? I challenged. Since we first met, it was the absolute first time Arthur was choked by my words, standing completely stunned in the middle of the hallway. After a long time, he finally found his voice, puffing out his chest to say he was a man, the pillar of the family, and should naturally bear the responsibility of supporting it. Isn't it good for you to stay home comfortably as a wife? He asked. He softened his voice, attempting to manipulate me. Deanne, I promise I will definitely. I interrupted him sharply, unwilling to hear the toxic lie that had deceived me for most of my past life. The lie where he promised he would treat me well, and take me traveling the country to enjoy life when he had time. You should resign, I shot back coldly. Besides our son, your aging parents are the ones who can't be left alone. Arthur opened his mouth in shock, then closed it, utterly speechless. I originally wanted to propose a divorce directly, but in this era, complete divorce freedom wasn't easily possible yet. Even though my parents were relatively open-minded, they wouldn't accept a rash, unprovoked divorce. I needed to find hard evidence of his sordid affair to get public opinion entirely on my side. Finally, after a tense standoff, Arthur and I reached a consensus to formally compete for the theater director position. and the loser would resign to care for the family. Arthur looked at me with deep arrogance. He claimed it wasn't the old master-apprentice inheritance era anymore, and singing well couldn't convince people. Management ability was the key. He then warned me harshly that since I was close to Mr. Davis and my parents had deep ties to theater elites, if he found any unfairness, he wouldn't care about our marital affection. His tone was incredibly harsh and cold, treating me like an outright enemy. I wondered how in my past life I ever thought he was cold on the outside, but warm on the inside, or responsible for our family. During our bitter argument, Tyler seemed completely deaf to the chaos. Just sitting on a plastic chair playing obsessively with the stolen tiger eraser. I now knew this was a stereotypical behavior of autistic children, but Arthur didn't have a clue. Furious, Arthur snatched the eraser from Tyler's hands and crushed it violently under his shoe. He screamed that Tyler was stupid, saying he couldn't speak and only caused massive trouble, costing him an entire year's salary in compensation to the injured boy's family. To vent his boiling anger, Arthur hit Tyler several times. In the past, I would have immediately stopped him, hugged Tyler protectively, taken all the responsibility, and used my own salary to make up the lost money. In my past life, I even went begging to my parents to borrow cash to take Tyler south for specialized medical treatment. But now, I just stood there coldly watching, even wanting to clap my hands and say well hit. Seeing absolutely no sympathetic reaction from me, Arthur faltered and stopped hitting the boy. "Diane, I knew you had a hard heart," he spat out before storming out and riding away on his bicycle. I knew perfectly well he was betting I would be soft-hearted towards our son, but thinking of my son helping them hide the affair from me and claiming the mistress had it hard. I was furious. I turned on my heel and walked away too. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Arthur stop his bike and ride back to check on the boy. I realized then that the child couldn't live without a mother, and the soft-hearted one would always be forced to give more. This time, I would proudly be the hard-hearted one. I wasn't just testing him, I had urgent things to deal with. I needed to find Evelyn, the beloved Aunt Evelyn, who supposedly guarded Arthur for half his life, and deserved half his estate. Actually, she and I were quite familiar. We both started out as lead ingenues in the theater company. After I gave birth to Tyler, my mother-in-law falsely claimed she had heart palpitations and couldn't help with the baby. As a result, I cooked, washed clothes, and held the baby starting the very next day, resulting in a severe herniated lumbar disc. Because of the injury, I couldn't dance anymore, and could only sing dramatic roles, while Evelyn proudly claimed to be the pillar of the troupe. I never planned to actually compete fairly with Arthur, because there was a convenient shortcut: Evelyn. I finally knew why Evelyn had targeted me everywhere after transferring from the countryside theater to our city troupe. She constantly hoped I, the old wife, would step down, but I hadn't let her get her wish. I used to foolishly think Arthur and I had a harmonious relationship, and fell in love at first sight. We first met when he came to the theater to report for duty with his luggage, and I was rehearsing on stage playing Juliet. In Romeo and Julieta, the actor playing Romeo sprained his ankle, and Arthur was unexpectedly pushed up onto the stage. He watched me act, we locked eyes, and I was deeply moved, thinking he was too. But in my past life, it wasn't until I died with profound regret that I realized his look held an inexplicable affection, as if he was looking at someone else right through me. Evelyn's signature role, I now remembered, was also Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. Before returning to the theater building, I went to the department store and secretly bought a cassette recorder from some shady guys in the back alley. When I got back, Evelyn was rehearsing Romeo and Juliet and dramatically rolled her eyes at me. In my past life, I thought she was just jealous of my superior singing, but now I knew she resented me for taking her Romeo and making them illegal lovers. Sneaking into the shadows, I hid the cassette recorder carefully in the corner of the prop room. When I came out, I saw Evelyn clinging desperately to Arthur, begging him to rehearse with her. She put a theatrical robe on him, and they acted intimately on stage, completely lost in each other. Afterward, Arthur loudly announced he was returning props, and walked into the prop room with Evelyn. In my past life, when bringing Arthur food, I saw them come out flushed with his shirt buttoned entirely wrong, and I naively believed his lie that they were just going over a new play. This time, waiting until they came out flushed again, I pinched my nose in disgust, went inside, and retrieved the hidden recorder. In a quiet corner, I pressed play. Arthur's recorded voice played back, saying he missed her like crazy when she was away on tour. After the disturbing sounds of rustling and moans, Evelyn thanked him profusely for getting her son into a city school, and declared she was his forever. Evelyn's husband, a stuntman in her old rural troupe, had passed away after falling from a high stage setup the year before. The troupe had made a rare exception to transfer her to the city to take care of her. Her child's city residency was very hard to handle. So Arthur used 2 bottles of expensive liquor from my family's home to bribe connections for her. Arthur's voice told her not to worry, stating that my family had deep, powerful roots, and he desperately needed their help until he officially became director. He assured Evelyn that their arrangement was fine without a legal piece of paper, and that his heart and body were entirely hers. Listening to the tape, I felt icy cold. Having never seen this tender, passionate side of Arthur, I always thought he was just a detached intellectual. After securing the cassette tape containing Arthur's damning confession, I headed straight back to our house. The familiar scent of stale coffee and mothballs greeted me at the door. Martha, my mother-in-law, was sitting in her armchair, listening to a classical radio station, with her eyes half closed. She peeled one eye open to glare at me, her voice dripping with disdain. "What kind of woman runs around outside all day showing her face in public, completely neglecting her own child?" she snapped, aggressively turning down the volume on the radio. "If this were the old days, I'd be cast out of the house by now, right?" I interrupted her sharply, refusing to play my usual submissive role. "Well, let me tell you, I am not afraid. It is the 1990s now. Not the Dark Ages. If you want me gone, we have to sign legal divorce papers first." Martha gasped, dramatically clutching her chest as her face contorted in mock agony. "Treason. This is pure rebellion," she wailed, leaning back heavily into the cushions. "I absolutely must tell Arthur. You're trying to give me a heart attack." When Arthur returned home from the theater, he found the stove completely cold, and his mother weeping hysterically. He immediately frowned in disgust, and Martha threw herself at him, tearfully recounting my unfilial crimes. In my previous life, she had successfully controlled me for decades, using exactly those 2 words. Weaponizing my sense of duty against me, I ignored their theatrical display, calmly packed my belongings into a leather duffel bag, and walked out into the living room. "Before the director auditions next month, we have the National Winter Showcase," I announced coldly. "I'm moving into the theater's staff apartments. Furthermore, since we are now in direct competition, living under the same roof is completely inappropriate." I pulled out a crisp $500 bill and slammed it onto the oak dining table. As his mother, this is my obligation for Tyler. This money is more than enough to cover all his expenses for the entire month. My monthly salary was only about $700. So giving up $500 was a substantial sacrifice. Arthur's face flushed with violent rage. He grabbed his favorite ceramic coffee mug and hurled it to the floor, shattering it into pieces. "If you have the guts to leave, then don't you ever come back," he roared. I remained entirely indifferent, glancing briefly at Tyler, who was sitting quietly in the corner, before walking out the front door without looking back. Once settled in the theater apartments, I threw myself into rehearsing day and night. The upcoming showcase was a national event, and television crews would be filming it. I knew that if I could win the top prize, taking over as theater director afterward would be undeniable. However, before the performance day even arrived, the atmosphere in the theater turned incredibly toxic. Everywhere I walked, I felt the burning sensation of people pointing and whispering behind my back. Determined to find the source, I intentionally hid inside a corner stall in the women's restroom to eavesdrop. "Is the rumor actually true?" a hushed voice echoed off the tile walls. "Is Diane really having an affair with Director Davis? It has to be true," another voice replied, which I instantly recognized as Sarah, the actress who played the supporting role of the nurse in our productions, and usually hung around Evelyn. The printed note explicitly detailed exactly what day she went into the director's office, and how long she stayed inside. If there is no shady business going on, why would Director Davis support Diane so much? She can't even dance the lead roles anymore. My blood ran cold. Arthur's harsh threat from days ago finally made sense. This was his backup plan. Having your reputation destroyed by vicious sexual rumors was absolutely fatal to a woman's career in this era. I knew I couldn't just take the beating passively. I had to snatch the initiative back into my own hands. As Sarah and the other actress continued to gossip, they walked toward the restroom exit. I violently kicked the stall door open, marching out to intercept them. Is what you just said true? Repeat everything you just said right now, I demanded, tightly grabbing Sarah's arm before she could escape. When she saw it was me, her eyes darted around in sheer panic, but she forced herself to put on a brave, defiant face. It is just what everyone is saying. I can't believe you have the nerve to yell about such a shameless thing. Are you afraid the whole theater won't hear about it? She spat, trying to yank her arm away. I'll say it again. You have such a wonderful husband in Arthur. Yet you're so greedy that you're sleeping with Director Davis just to win the audition. Instead of arguing back, I immediately let out a blood-curdling wail, collapsed onto the cold tile floor, and wrapped my arms desperately around Sarah's legs. I had no idea I was drugged and assaulted. I screamed at the top of my lungs, forcing tears to stream down my face. I didn't know any of this. You have to be my witness, Sarah. We have to bring that offender to justice. My piercing screams echoed down the hallway. And within minutes, a massive crowd of actors, stagehands, and administrators rushed in to see the commotion. I looked around the growing crowd, my face a mask of utter devastation. Please, someone call the police. I am a married woman. I can't believe I was. This is driving me to despair. I can't live like this. Drawing on decades of operatic vocal training, I projected my voice so loudly that it practically rattled the windows and scared a flock of pigeons off the roof. Seeing someone actually sprinting toward the front desk to call the cops, Sarah completely panicked. She desperately started prying at my fingers, trying to free her leg. I just heard it from someone else. I didn't see anything. How can I be your witness? I held on tighter. Then who told you? They must know. Terrified of going down for a crime, Sarah rapidly blurted out Evelyn's name. When the police arrived, they immediately summoned both Evelyn and Director Davis for questioning. They also collected numerous typed notes scattered around the theater, detailing my supposed transactional affair with the director. Because of the severe nature of the allegations, even the regional arts council leaders rushed over to manage the crisis. I discreetly blinked at Director Davis. He had watched me grow up and knew I always had a plan. So he merely glared at me as a warning that we would settle the theatrical stunt later. Under immense interrogation pressure from the police, Evelyn broke down and admitted that she fabricated the rumors and hadn't actually seen anything. The police officer looked at her sternly. Your actions have severely disrupted public order and caused massive damage to Diane's reputation, he scolded. Evelyn bit her lip, looking tearfully over the crowd toward Arthur, but said absolutely nothing. Arthur forcefully pushed his way through the crowd. Diane is my wife, he announced smoothly. Since this is all a big misunderstanding, it was just a joke between colleagues. I represent her, and we will not pursue this matter any further. I sneered loudly. I have my own mouth. When did I ever need you to represent me? I turned back to the officers. Officer, I want to press full legal charges against the rumormonger to restore my reputation. Arthur looked absolutely furious, but his hands were entirely tied. Because of my strict insistence, Evelyn was sentenced to 5 days in police custody for criminal harassment, and was ordered to write a public apology letter, to be posted on the theater's bulletin board for a month. The regional arts leaders immediately announced a major demerit against Evelyn. Not only was she stripped of her eligibility for awards for 5 years, but she was also strictly banned from performing in any showcases for 3 years. Relegated exclusively to background extra roles. The stage is the face of this theater, the lead official barked. Your behavior has brought shame to this entire institution. With that single sentence, her career as a leading lady was effectively annihilated. Arthur pointed a trembling finger at me. You're so vindictive over a small slight. You truly are narrow-minded. I ignored him entirely, staring down at one of the typed notes the police had dropped. The few handwritten edits on the margins didn't match Arthur's handwriting. Nor did they match Evelyn's. I didn't have time to investigate it now, though. Tomorrow was the showcase, and I needed to prepare. That evening, I was in my small apartment boiling a pot of fragrant Earl Grey tea, resting my vocal cords for tomorrow's performance. The steam curled beautifully in the air. A sudden knock at the door broke the silence. When I opened it, I found Arthur standing outside with Tyler in tow. The boy said he missed you, so I brought him to see you, Arthur said, his face twitching with unnatural stiffness. It made sense. I was always the one to yield and soften in our marriage. A man as arrogant as him rarely ever bowed his head to me. I remained perfectly silent, simply crossing my arms and leaning against the doorframe, a cold smile on my lips. Seeing that I wasn't taking the bait, Arthur dropped the excuse of our son. About what happened today. I was wrong, he muttered. I was just worried that blowing things out of proportion would look bad for you. So I wanted to smooth things over. A few actors were walking down the hallway, deliberately slowing their pace to eavesdrop. Not wanting to cause another public scene, I stepped aside and let them in. Tyler silently followed Arthur inside, clutching the hem of his father's coat. I immediately noticed that Tyler was still wearing the exact same thin, unwashed jacket he had on the day I left, which was now covered in grime. We were in the dead of winter, and he was constantly sniffing his runny nose. My nose stung, and the steam from the tea kettle suddenly felt very hot against my face, bringing a rush of moisture to my eyes. I quickly turned my head away. Seeing my reaction, Arthur pushed Tyler slightly forward. Diane, you're a woman. Being this stubborn isn't good for you. Since leaving his mother, the boy has already gotten sick twice. How can you be so cruel? I remained stubbornly silent. In my past life, I truly was incredibly soft-hearted. But what did it get me? A few years after Arthur took over, the theater was privatized and transformed into a multi-million-dollar arts center. And he managed budgets worth millions. Yet he only ever brought home a meager monthly salary. Claiming he was an honest man who refused to be corrupted by corporate bribes, I had to work night shifts at a local diner just to keep our family afloat. It wasn't until I died that I learned his actual salary was massive, and he had funneled all his bribes into cash to buy a luxury suburban mansion exclusively under Evelyn's name. His so-called estate was actually the meager savings I had scraped together. Furthermore, Tyler grew up to have a smooth career in arts management, thanks to his father's connections, obeying Arthur blindly while treating me, the mother who sacrificed everything to cure him, with absolute disgust and contempt. His favorite phrase to me was always, "What do you know?" floating as a ghost. I even watched Tyler happily host Arthur and Evelyn's bedside wedding. I snapped out of my memories and avoided Tyler's dirty little hand as he reached out to me. "He is the sole heir to your family," I said coldly. "Is this how you and your mother take care of him?" As I looked down, I noticed a bright smear of bright red lipstick on the corner of Tyler's mouth. It was heavy theatrical lipstick. "Aunt Evelyn takes really good care of me," Tyler suddenly blurted out. "She even teaches me how to sing the soprano parts." Arthur's face drained of color, and he immediately yelled at Tyler to shut up. Panicking, he shoved a heavy ceramic pot into my hands. "The boy specially made this beef casserole for you. Eat it to build your strength for tomorrow's performance." He repeatedly ordered me to eat it before grabbing Tyler and practically fleeing the apartment. The second the door clicked shut, I dumped the entire casserole out the window. A stray cat meowed from the alleyway, hungrily licking the meat from the pavement. The next morning, when I left for the theater, I called out to the cat. It gave a lazy meow and rolled over, falling back into a deep, peaceful sleep. When the orchestra struck up, I stood firmly center stage. I didn't miss the look of utter shock on Arthur's face in the wings. The spotlight hit me, and I unleashed my voice, hitting every note with flawless precision. When the final note faded, the theater fell dead silent before erupting into deafening Thunderous applause. As the crowd dispersed, Arthur cornered me. "Don't get cocky, Diane. I already have tomorrow's director audition in the bag," he hissed bitterly. "Even your own father supports me more than you. He said you should just stay home and be a good wife." Arthur had always played the role of the perfect, flawless son-in-law in front of my parents. He was gentle, polite, and handled everything smoothly. Even when we occasionally argued, my parents would inevitably side with him and scold me, but he forgot one crucial detail. Blood is thicker than water. My parents only supported his career because they genuinely hoped I would live a carefree, happy life. In my previous life, terrified of making my parents sad, I always swallowed my misery and only ever told them good news. After they tragically passed away in an accident, Arthur's gentle facade vanished overnight, and he began staying out all night, using work as a perpetual excuse. I immediately took the cassette recorder to my parents' house. Before the tape even finished playing, my father was purple with rage, marching toward the door to tear Arthur apart. I barely managed to stop him, promising I would handle it myself. "This time, the director's seat is guaranteed to be mine," I assured him. My father fumed. "And to think I just called the State Theater Board a few days ago to ask them to look out for him. I'm calling them right now to tell them to vote against him." I smiled thinly. "No need to go through the trouble, Dad. He is not going to make it to the audition anyway." The day before the final audition, Evelyn was released from her holding cell. She looked incredibly haggard, which only made her look more fragile and pitiful. Arthur couldn't hide the deep heartache on his face as they gazed longingly at each other across the lobby. At dusk, after the theater emptied out, I watched the two of them slip quietly into the back prop room, one after the other. I immediately tracked down Sarah. The neighboring theater company requested to borrow that antique Victorian emerald tiara we have. "I recall you're the one in charge of keeping it safe," I told her. Sarah, who had recently taken over Evelyn's lead roles and frequently handled the props, immediately went to check the velvet box. She froze. A massive emerald brooch that attached to the tiara was missing. She instantly panicked, screaming down the hallway about the missing antique. The heirloom was incredibly valuable, a genuine piece passed down from the late 19th century. A crowd quickly gathered, murmuring in alarm. Sarah shrieked. "I put the tiara in the prop room this morning. I didn't check it carefully after rehearsal. Anyone who went in there today is a prime suspect." Someone logically suggested we check the prop room to see if it had just fallen on the floor. A massive group of staff marched down the hall, with me trailing quietly at the very back. The moment they reached the door, explicitly intimate, blushing sounds drifted into the hallway. The entire crowd stopped dead in their tracks, exchanging horrified, knowing glances as the chaotic hallway fell dead silent. "Oh, Arthur, you have no idea what I went through in that cell these past few days," Evelyn moaned breathlessly, her voice drifting out like a theatrical line. "Take pity on me. Divorce her and marry me soon. Once she is a discarded wife, we'll see how smug she is then." Arthur's heavy breathing followed. Evelyn, I'll definitely give you a proper answer this time. I originally planned to use her family's power as a stepping stone, but the woman is too ambitious. She actually wants to fight me for the director job. The sedative medication I slipped her last time didn't work, so I'm getting ether tomorrow. As long as she misses the audition and I become director, I'll divorce her and marry you." The crowd slowly turned to look at me. Sparks of pity, shock, and utter disgust toward Arthur rained down on me. Without a word, I kicked the heavy wooden door violently off its latch. Inside, sweat was dripping down Arthur's bare back, and Evelyn was partially unclothed beneath him. In sheer terror, they scrambled to grab handfuls of vintage costumes to cover their exposed bodies. "Arthur, is this how you two practice your lines?" I shrieked, my voice cracking perfectly. The resulting scandal rocked the theater to its core. Arthur was slapped with a massive official demerit for grossly immoral conduct and sabotaging the theater's image. Evelyn, having just been punished, and now caught causing another severe infraction, was completely fired. While everyone was sighing in shock and pity, I discreetly rubbed jalapeno juice on my fingers and wiped my eyes, forcing a stream of violent, uncontrollable tears. I have no face left to live in this world. I wailed into my hands. I demand a divorce. Arthur's face turned a violent, bruised shade of purple as he realized his career was completely ruined. Cornered, he desperately resorted to using our son's custody to threaten me. Fine, we can divorce. But Tyler is the sole heir to my family's name. He stays with me, Arthur spat, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Of course, if you can't bear to leave him. Before he could even finish his manipulative sentence, I interrupted him coldly. I can bear it, I said without missing a beat. Arthur was entirely taken aback, continuing to ramble as if he hadn't heard me. I knew you wouldn't be able to let him go. Since that is the case, look, I just made a mistake that any man would make. If you can just resign and take care of the family, I promise I will never do anything to betray you again. The remaining theater staff in the hallway looked at him, as if he were completely insane. And it was only then that Arthur realized something was horribly wrong with my reaction. Wait, you can actually let him go, he stammered, disbelief washing over his face. When you gave birth to Tyler, you nearly died in labor, and the doctors said you could never have children again. All these years you've treated that boy like the apple of your eye. You ran around the country begging doctors for a cure for his autism. On that 30-hour train ride south there was only one seat, and you stood the entire way just so he could sit. And now, you're willing to give him up. Hearing him list my sacrifices, I realized he knew exactly how much I had given up for our family. He simply took it all for granted once he got used to my endless giving. I nodded firmly. Tyler said it himself. He prefers his Aunt Evelyn. She teaches him how to sing soprano, while I only force him to do his schoolwork. At that moment, Evelyn boldly stepped forward, her disheveled state now wrapped in a velvet stage curtain, and clung tightly to Arthur's arm. Arthur, since Diane has the self-awareness to step down voluntarily, we shouldn't reject her kind offer. Evelyn cooed. She then turned to me, offering a sweet artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. In that case, I thank you for making way for me, sister. I promise I will treat Tyler as my own biological son and cultivate his talents well. Arthur ground his teeth, glaring at me. Are you absolutely sure about this? I nodded, pulling a pre-prepared divorce agreement from my leather bag. In it, I voluntarily surrendered custody of Tyler and agreed to pay $100 a month in child support. Arthur scoffed arrogantly. Who cares about your measly $100? I'll make sure you never get to see my son again. Perfect, I replied flatly. I immediately took a pen and crossed out the original clauses. Writing in bold letters, Fifth voluntarily waives all visitation rights, and is no longer liable for any child supportee. Arthur stared at the modified paper in stunned silence for a long time before finally, begrudgingly, signing his name. Luckily, in the 1990s, there were no mandatory cooling off periods for divorce. So I received my official divorce certificate that exact same day, knowing they could no longer survive in the theater company. After such a massive, humiliating scandal, Arthur and Evelyn packed their things and left together in disgrace. With my primary rival gone, I was successfully promoted to the position of theater director. Over the past few years, the theater had seen decent growth, but the staff was aging, and the scripts lacked innovation. I knew this model wouldn't last. I immediately launched bold, sweeping reforms, opening up nationwide auditions for new talent. This reality TV-style approach was entirely novel, and with the media heavily promoting it, the public's interest skyrocketed. Suddenly, thousands of children wanted to study performing arts. Because of the massive surge in theatrical interest, numerous private acting academies sprang up like mushrooms after the rain. Among them, the one gaining the most aggressive momentum was an institution called the 40 Juliet Arts Conservatory. Though it was newly established, rumors circulated that its founder was a gold medal-winning lead actress. As the newly minted director of the State Theater, I was officially invited by the local arts council to inspect the facility. When I arrived, I stopped dead in my tracks. Displayed prominently on the glass storefront was a massive promotional photo of Arthur and Evelyn. They were dressed in elaborate Shakespearean costumes, embracing each other. Just below them was another photo. Tyler dressed entirely in women's clothing, wearing heavy makeup, a corseted gown, and a tragic expression, playing the role of the doomed Juliet. He looked exceptionally, almost eerily, beautiful. In my previous life, I had noticed Tyler's gender dysphoria and his obsession with cross-dressing early on. He had even threatened to undergo extreme back alley cosmetic surgeries. Terrified for his safety, I had desperately stopped him, slept in his room to watch over him, studied psychology, and guided him toward a healthier understanding of himself. But now, without my intervention, Arthur not only failed to stop him, but he and Evelyn were actively exploiting his gender expression for their business's profit. I stood outside the glass windows, watching Evelyn strictly pacing among dozens of young female students, aggressively waving a wooden pointing stick. For a class of dozens of young children, she was the sole instructor. As the girls practiced dangerous backbends and acrobatic stretches, there was absolutely no one around to spot them or ensure their safety. I shook my head in disgust, and immediately informed the accompanying education department officials about the severe liability risks of such reckless coaching. But before the education department could even draft a mandate for the conservatory to suspend operations and rectify their safety protocols, tragedy struck the Arts Academy. During a grueling flexibility session, a young girl tearfully cried out that her lower back was in agonizing pain. Instead of letting her rest, Evelyn berated her for being lazy, and actually ordered Tyler to step directly onto the girl's spine to force her deeper into the stretch. With a sickening sea-cracky, the young girl's lumbar vertebrae snapped. In an instant, she was unable to walk from the waist down, confined to a bed for the rest of her life. The injured girl's devastated parents, along with dozens of furious relatives, formed a daily blockade outside Arthur's front door. They demanded criminal justice and a massive crippling sum of money in medical compensation. In a panic to save herself, Evelyn secretly forged documents to change the legal representative and owner of the conservatory to Martha, Arthur's mother. She also ruthlessly threw Tyler under the bus, framing him as the primary culprit who physically broke the girl's back. Martha had suffered from a chronic heart condition and premature ventricular contractions for years. She usually claimed she was having heart palpitations at the slightest inconvenience, but Evelyn, putting on her best theatrical performance, fell crying into Arthur's arms. "Your mother's illness is entirely faked," she sobbed manipulatively. "When Diane was your wife, she never once complained about chest pain, but ever since I married you, she demands to go to the hospital every 3 days. I know she is just trying to torture me. If it weren't for needing money to treat her fake illnesses and raise your abnormal son, I wouldn't have enrolled so many students, and this accident would never have happened." Evelyn wiped her fake tears. "She is an old woman. Those violent protesters outside won't dare lay a finger on her. Let her deal with them." Seeing Arthur lower his head in cowardly silence, Martha realized her son was abandoning her. Having no other choice, she attempted to go to the hospital to get her medication. The moment she stepped out the front door, the furious mob of protesters drenched her from head to toe in buckets of dark red paint. The sheer terror and shock triggered a severe heart failure. Martha collapsed on her front porch and passed away. The city we lived in wasn't exceptionally large, and the theater community was tightly knit, so I quickly learned the full truth of the catastrophe. In my previous life, under my meticulous, exhausting care, that old woman had lived comfortably to the ripe age of 83. Now, she was gone before she even turned 60. Seeing that a tragic incident had occurred, the injured girl's family realized they wouldn't get their money and hastily backed off, abandoning the protests. Naturally, Arthur and Evelyn's conservatory was permanently shut down. Because my influence in the arts circle was growing exponentially, they couldn't find any decent work in the city. To make ends meet, a 40-year-old Evelyn was forced to come out of retirement and join a ragtag, traveling carnival troupe just to earn pennies. Arthur, finally dropping his arrogant college graduate persona, joined her, setting up cheap wooden stages in rural villages to perform Southern Romeo and Juliet. For indifferent farmers, they wandered the streets and alleyways, reduced to the absolute lowest rung of performers. The theater's official privatization and restructuring happened that exact same year. Just as Arthur had in my previous life, I seamlessly transitioned into the role of the director of the Arts Center. However, I quickly realized that the job was nowhere near as busy as Arthur had always claimed. I finally understood that all those years ago, he had simply used rehearsals and business trips as convenient excuses to sleep with Evelyn in their secret suburban mansion. The Arts Center quickly stepped onto the right track under my strict, forward-thinking management, and the theater company finally completed its much-needed generational transition. Scores of brilliant, ambitious college graduates majoring in dramatic arts and theater management flooded in to apply for positions, bringing fresh ideas and modern techniques. We even hired a few individuals with master's degrees from prestigious Ivy League arts programs. Surrounded by this sheer volume of highly educated, dynamic talent, I finally realized just how painfully ordinary and dim Arthur's so-called college graduate halo truly was. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Sarah knocked on my office door. Her once arrogant personality had been completely smoothed out by years of hard knocks. Her attitude toward me was now incredibly humble and subservient. "Director Diane, here are some old props and items from the theater's original storage space," she said softly, placing a dusty cardboard box on my mahogany desk. "Could you take a look and decide how to dispose of them, so I know what to do?" I hadn't intentionally made things difficult for Sarah over the years, but the people working under me were exceptional at reading the room. Knowing our history, they had taken it upon themselves to relegate her strictly to backstage logistical work. I sifted through the box of miscellaneous items. Suddenly, a flash of green caught my eye. There it was, the antique Victorian emerald brooch that I had deliberately hidden under a pile of heavy costumes, all those years ago to set Arthur and Evelyn up. I picked it up, dusted it off, and instructed Sarah to place it back with the matching tiara in the lobby's secure glass display case. At the very bottom of the cardboard box, hidden beneath some faded playbills, was an old black leather-bound journal. The yellowed title page bore Arthur's name, but the handwriting was entirely unfamiliar to me, curiosity getting the better of me. I opened it and began to read. "Evelyn, I finally got into college. It's all thanks to you." I flipped through the fragile pages, reading entry after entry, and the massive tangled mystery in my heart finally unraveled. According to the diary, during the year Arthur was preparing for his college entrance exams, his right hand was severely injured in a horrific farming accident involving a heavy wheat thresher. He was completely devastated and had already given up hope of ever taking the exams or making anything of himself. It was Evelyn who pulled him from the brink of despair. She encouraged him daily, singing beautiful theater arias to soothe his shattered nerves. Under her patient guidance, he painstakingly learned how to write with his left hand, eventually passing the exams and securing his ticket out of poverty. He had meticulously planned to return and marry Evelyn immediately after graduation, but facing immense financial and social pressure from her rural family, Evelyn was forced into an arranged marriage with the stuntman instead. Heartbroken, Arthur ruthlessly buried his feelings and made a calculated decision. He chose to marry me, a woman from a wealthy, established theatrical family, knowing my connections would save him a decade of agonizing career struggles. What a beautifully tragic, star-crossed love story. Two passionate lovers forced apart by cruel fate and circumstance. If only I hadn't been the innocent casualty of their romance. Effet, how deeply unfair it was that my entire life, my youth, and my absolute devotion were treated as nothing more than a sacrificial offering for their true love. No wonder the handwriting on the malicious rumor notes, scattered around the theater, all those years ago looked so foreign to me. I had spent a lifetime sleeping next to a man I never truly knew. I let out a long heavy sigh and snapped the black notebook shut. I put on my trench coat and walked out the front doors of the Arts Center. As I stepped onto the plaza, I noticed a young woman standing near the marble steps. She wore heavy, flawless makeup and a chic designer coat, though her bone structure was noticeably broad. Out of sheer curiosity, I took a second glance. The girl was undeniably beautiful. But as she walked toward me, moving her hips with an exaggerated, swaying grace. An eerie sense of familiarity washed over me. "Mom," the young woman said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "I was kicked out by Evelyn. Please, I'm begging you. Take me in." I stood frozen on the plaza steps, my mind struggling to process the impossible reality standing in front of me. I stared intently at the young woman's face, tracing the familiar lines of her jaw and the shape of her eyes. "You? Are you Tyler?" I finally choked out, my voice trembling in pure disbelief. He had actually gone through with the massive cosmetic surgeries, needing to get off the street. I led Tyler, who now demanded to be called Elena, to a quiet, dimly lit corner of a nearby upscale coffee shop. We sat across from each other in a velvet booth. Even now, after an hour, I still found it difficult to look her directly in the eye. Elena aggressively pulled handfuls of napkins from the silver dispenser on the table, frantically dabbing at the thick, black mascara, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom Evelyn drained every single penny of the family's savings to pay for her own biological son's lavish wedding and buy him a house. She didn't leave a single dime for me, Elena sobbed, her voice carrying a forced theatrical pitch that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "The money I used for my surgeries, it all came from unlicensed payday loans," she continued, her hands trembling around her coffee mug. "Now the loan sharks are violently hunting me down to collect the debt. Dad doesn't care about me at all anymore. You're the only one who can save me." The full picture finally came into focus. As Tyler grew older, his male physical characteristics had become impossible to hide, completely ending his ability to perform the delicate female soprano roles on stage with Arthur and Evelyn. When Tyler turned 18, Evelyn coldly declared that raising such a special and difficult child was too exhausting, and that she had fulfilled her basic obligations. Furious and feeling abandoned, Tyler decided to fully transition into Elena, to achieve the most perfect results. She opted for complete, highly expensive bottom surgery, permanently resolving the issue at the physical root. Because of this, the precious family bloodline, that Arthur had valued more than anything else in the world, was completely and permanently severed. Arthur's family had a long history of hereditary heart disease. Upon discovering what Elena had done, Arthur flew into a fit of blinding, catastrophic rage, triggering severe heart failure that instantly put him in the hospital on life support. With Arthur incapacitated, Evelyn did exactly as she pleased, ruthlessly throwing Elena out of the house onto the streets. I reached into my designer handbag, pulled out a debit card, and slid it across the polished wooden table. "There is $50,000 in this account," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "It is the exact sum of the child support I owed from the time you were 8 until you turned 18. I brought you into this world, and this fulfills my final legal and moral responsibility to you." Elena stared at the card, her mouth opening in shock. "As for anything more, I am completely powerless to help you," I finished, grabbing my purse and standing up. "The coffee is on me." I walked out of the cafe, never looking back. I never saw Elena in person again. Well, that wasn't entirely true. Occasionally, the algorithm would push her content to my phone. Capitalizing on her striking looks, she gained some minor fame as a drag and transition influencer, doing live streams. However, as the social media platforms tightened their regulations on explicit content, her channel was banned. Desperate for money, she fled abroad to Southeast Asia to continue her unregulated broadcasting career. The absolute last time I saw her online, the glamour was entirely gone. Her arms and shoulders were covered in dark marks, and her wrists bore deep red marks that looked exactly like rope marks. She sat in front of the camera, holding up a peace sign with trembling fingers, gesturing erratically. Someone in the live chat typed, "Hi BD, are you being threatened by a dangerous syndicate? Blink twice if you need us to call the police." I watched the screen as Elena, her beautiful eyes filled with absolute stark terror, and brimming with tears, blinked twice. A second later, the live stream abruptly cut to black, and her account vanished forever. I drove my Mercedes to the underfunded, dilapidated city hospital, where Arthur was being kept, and brought the grim news of Elena's disappearance to him. I stood at the foot of his metal bed, His face was as pale as a sheet of parchment paper, and a tangle of wires connected his frail chest to a relentless, beeping ECG monitor. When the attending physician saw me standing there, he practically sprinted over, looking entirely relieved. "Are you a family member?" "Thank God. He already owes over $30,000 in medical bills, and absolutely no one has come to clear the debt or discharge him." The doctor rubbed his temples. "Our hospital charity can cover a portion of it, but you need to pay at least $10,000 immediately, before we can release him to hospice care." Because his bills were so heavily delinquent, the hospital was only administering the absolute cheapest, bare minimum generic drugs just to keep him breathing. I shook my head slowly, offering the doctor a polite, apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry, doctor, but I am not closely acquainted with this man." Arthur weakly reached out, his trembling fingers tightly gripping the hem of my silk coat. Hot, desperate tears streamed down his sunken cheeks. "Diane, I never thought I'd be able to see you alive one last time in this life," he wheezed, struggling to draw oxygen into his failing lungs. "I've been falling into deep comas lately, and whenever I fall asleep, I have the most incredibly strange dream," he whispered, his eyes glazing over with a desperate yearning. "In the dream, you and I are perfectly in tune. We walk through a long, beautiful life together. My parents pass away peacefully of old age, and our son Tyler grows up to have an incredibly successful career." A sad, hollow laugh escaped his lips. "How wonderful it was. What a shame it was just a dream." I pulled a crisp red apple from the fruit basket on the bedside table, took a small paring knife, and slowly began to peel it. The red skin fell away in long, continuous, unbroken curls. When I finally looked up from the fruit, Arthur's face was completely drenched in tears. "Diane, I was wrong. I regret everything," he sobbed violently. "I thought I was fulfilling my teenage dream with Evelyn, and that my life would have no regrets. But lying here on my deathbed, I finally realize how pathetic, ignorant, and laughable that youthful romance was. You were kind, gentle, and fiercely courageous, and I threw you away." I let out a soft, elegant chuckle. "None of that matters anymore, Arthur," I said, my voice as cold as winter ice. "The only thing that matters is that your time is over." I took a deliberate bite of the apple. The juice was incredibly sweet and refreshing. "And in this life, you don't have a single penny of an estate left to divide." I turned on my heel and walked out of the room. I hadn't even made it past the threshold when the ECG monitor erupted into a deafening, continuous heart monitor alarm. A swarm of nurses and doctors rushed past me into the room, shouting for a crash cart. Arthur's remains went unclaimed. The hospital was forced to call the police, who eventually tracked down Evelyn, forcing her to come to the hospital and legally absorb his massive medical debt. A few weeks later, I happened to be at that same hospital for my routine physical at the luxury VIP clinic. As I walked through the main lobby, I brushed past a woman. It was Evelyn. Her expression was completely hollow. Her clothes were stiff with years of accumulated grime, and her murky eyes darted around in frantic paranoia. By stark contrast, I was dressed impeccably, my skin glowing, radiating confidence and success. She seemed to recognize me for a split second. A look of absolute terror and profound shame washed over her face, and she quickly hunched her back, scurrying away to hide herself deep within the crowded lobby. I walked out the hospital's glass sliding doors. The afternoon sunshine was absolutely perfect. I tilted my head back, squinting happily into the brilliant blue sky. Tomorrow, I would be driving to the international airport to pick up my parents, who were returning from a luxurious, month-long vacation in Europe. This magnificent, wonderful life was earned entirely through my own relentless effort. I had finally taken the reins, keeping my destiny strictly and powerfully in my own hands.